Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hello everyone, my name is Dylan. You may know me from the Offshore Gamescast, which is a weekly gaming podcast that I host with my good friend Dave, where we try to keep you up to date on all the latest video games coming out. We play anything from, a little hidden indie gem that just came out or a big AAA game. So check us out if you need thoughts and opinions on all of that. I am also from the Dual Wielding Podcast, which is a new project launching very soon. May actually already be out by the time you're listening to this, so keep an eye out for that. Big thank you to Matt from the Fun and Games Podcast and the Reignite Podcast, amongst other things, for having me on to talk about one of my favorite games, which is Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect is one of my favorite video game franchises, hands down. Especially the original trilogy that follows Commander Shepard and the War Against the Reapers. I want to talk specifically about Mass Effect 3 because of the bad reputation that it has. And that bad reputation stems from the very end of 3, the end of the trilogy, the end of Commander Shepard's story, the end of the story with the Reapers, and I'm not going to necessarily defend that specific part. I will touch on it. I'm gonna talk about story stuff a little more in depth towards the end of this, so I can give a good spoiler warning for that. But other than that part of the game, I think Mass Effect 3 is superb in pretty much every way it possibly can be. So I'm going to start with gameplay before getting into spoiler territory. Gameplay is pretty similar to 2, as in it builds off of what 2 changed from 1. So it's still a third-person cover shooter, but what they did was make it much more fast-paced. The actual movement itself, I had to look this up, they purposely beefed it up by like 10 to 15%, I think it was, which makes sense because I would say my biggest issue with the gameplay in 2 was that it got kind of too samey of just picking a spot, covering there, and just looking up, shooting, and that was about it with a few exceptions. But in 3, they wanted to still have that cover shooter core mechanic, which they do, while also getting you moving around much more and at a much quicker pace. And I think they really successfully do that. So you can sprint around without running out of stamina, which more games need to just do in general. I get for some games you need the constraints and everything, but let me just sprint around. Let me sprint, not have to get tired and slow down. It's annoying. Great mechanic to add for speeding up a game and the gameplay. You could just vault and jump over barriers without needing to take cover anymore. So a lot of just streamlining that specific part of the game. On top of that, they made the enemies a lot smarter. So I found personally Mass Effect 3 to be more difficult than either 1 or 2. And I'm sure that was done intentionally. And I think it ties in to the overall story of Mass Effect 3, which is why I love how the enemies are so much smarter as well. They must have changed around something with the AI of enemies, or at least the pairing of enemies, because a lot of times you will be forced out of cover because you can't just sit in one spot. And you get in some tricky situations because some enemies seem like they're designed to kind of suppress you, keep you down, while at the same time they send those classic husk enemies at you in like a big horde running right at you. So you're kind of like stuck in this spot, but also need to move, and it really opens up gameplay in that way. Instead of just picking a spot, taking cover, peeking, and shooting, and then just rinsing and repeating from that spot until all the enemies are down, you have to think much more on your feet, a lot more dynamically. And I say that ties in with the story, even if they didn't mean to do it in this way. They probably just want to make gameplay better, which, of course, I get that. But this game is all about trying to survive the outright war and attack and invasion from the Reapers. The Reapers are looking to wipe out all sentient beings, all living races, all aliens, all humans, like everyone. They want to kill them all. And they have been pretty successful many times in the past, and quite frankly look like they're going to be successful here. It's not going to be easy. Fighting is not going to be as simple as taking cover and shooting. It's going to be hard. Enemies are going to be difficult. You're going to get overwhelmed. And that constant sense of being overwhelmed and having to think quickly on your feet, kind of, for me at least, in my experience, adds a lot to the epicness of what this game is. It constantly feels like big things are happening and that you are under constant distress and attack. And that's kind of the point. The galaxy is being completely invaded. And I love the way that the changes they made to gameplay kind of mirrors that. You're not playing as safe anymore. You have to take risks. You have to move around a lot. And it all ties together in a very neat way that also just makes for the most fun playing from the original trilogy. On top of that, they added, I remember it being pretty divisive at the time, but they added a 4-player online co-op mode. I really enjoy this because I can't think of a single other instance where a game took a mode like this and tied it into the single-player mode so well and in a very interesting way. And I totally get why it's divisive. So you play as a completely separate character in this online mode. You can choose from all the big races that are in the game. So, like, you can be a human, or you can be an Asari, a Quarian, Turian, etc., all the big races from the game. But you're not Commander Shepard. You are playing as this new character that has its own progression in this online co-op mode on the front lines of different locations that you different maps that you swap around as you play through the mode. And the idea is you are defending that area from the Reaper invasion. As we just discussed, it's happening everywhere. So your character progresses through multiplayer, it levels up, you can, continue on with that character. It's basically a horde mode. They send waves, I think it was waves of 10? Might have been 5, I think it was 10, of enemies, of Reapers coming at you. And they all, throughout these waves, you had different objectives you had to complete while killing off and surviving these 10 waves. So it might be, there are these specific devices all around the map that you have to go activate or interact with as you're fending off these enemies for whatever reason it may be, but usually to help fend off the Reapers. Now, the controversial part of this mode is the fact that as you successfully defended these different outposts or areas, whatever they may be called, from the Reapers, it would boost your galactic readiness in the single-player campaign. And galactic readiness, the higher it is, it's essentially the story reason is you're more ready to take on the Reapers. The galaxy, the galactic readiness is prepared. You're prepared to fight the Reapers. The lower your galactic readiness, the worse you're going to do. The higher, the better. Essentially, that number affects the main story ending in significant ways. And so the fact that they took this multiplayer mode, and it's not just the multiplayer mode, it is all the decisions you make throughout all 3 games that affect this galactic readiness. But the fact that they took this multiplayer mode and tied it into the single player mode in such a significant way, because I'm pretty sure you had to at least play through some of the multiplayer to have your galactic readiness high enough to get the best endings or the true endings, whatever they may be. Which I get why that's divisive, and I can't think of a single other game. I'm sure there is another one, but I can't think of another one that took such a big risk with something like this, because the Mass Effect series touted itself on being this single-player RPG, all about your decisions and that mattering. Then for the final conclusion, they kind of throw in a multiplayer mode where that's going to start affecting things. I think the lore reason is really cool. I think playing as a separate character is really cool, and I found the mode to be surprisingly fun. And I really love the ambition of that. Of course, I get the mixed reaction. A lot of people are not coming to Mass Effect. The vast majority of people are not coming to Mass Effect to play multiplayer. I get that. But I still really respect the ambition of that. I can't think of a time it has been implemented, a mode like that has been implemented in such a significant way in a game since. And that's why I love it. Aside from the fact that it was pretty fun, it's so ambitious. And the Legendary Edition, so that's the remastered of the original trilogy that came out in 2020, I believe, maybe 2021. There's no online mode in that. And again, I get that because it was so divisive at the time. And now for people that want to revisit Mass Effect or maybe experience it for the first time, that's not exactly what they're going for. But I love the ambition. I love the risk. I think it works. And I wish more games did stuff like this, honestly, to make you care about some sort of multiplayer mode in a single-player campaign game. Again, it was divisive. I'm pretty sure I'm in the minority with this opinion, but I think at the very least you have to respect the ambition of what they were going for. With that out of the way, let's talk about the meat of Mass Effect 3, the story. So I'm going to throw up a spoiler warning. I'm not going to go super deep into everything. I would need hours and hours to do that with the Mass Effect franchise, but spoiler warning for everything ahead if you don't know what happens in Mass Effect 3 and don't want to hear about it. The main ending has problems. I think everything else, all the other stories, and I'm going to give a couple examples, are done so well. So one of the big things you're doing in Mass Effect 3 is trying to gather all the races together and united, because that's really the only way you're going to truly defeat the Reapers. Now, going back to the first game, there's a lot of reasons that some of the races don't get along with each other. One of the big one being the genophage. The way this is probably, this and the other one I'm going to talk about, is what I kind of wanted the main ending to draw more on. So, not going to go too deep, again, into everything with the genophage. I would need way more time. So I'm just going to talk about the actual decision-making and how everything mattered for this storyline. So Mordin wants to cure the genophage, and you need to do that to complete the treaty between the Krogans and the Turians. Get them united once more. And Mordin has his own guilt issues involved with the genophage and how it came to be. You have the option to sabotage the genophage and essentially trick the Krogan into thinking the cure was put out there, or letting it happen and actually curing the genophage. And this is where it starts to fascinate me. Most of these things go back to kind of Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 1 that will affect this. For example, if Rex doesn't survive in Mass Effect 1, you kind of completely lose the option of trying to trick Mordin, who becomes suspicious. On top of that, different characters will die or survive based on the decisions you make throughout this mission and the decisions you made in past games. This is where the main ending has its major fault. It doesn't draw on the past games and everything you've done as Commander Shepard up until then like this does. And, of course, it has one of the most emotional, impactful moments when Mordin sacrifices himself to cure the genophage. And even going back, which I do from time to time, just to watch a highlight, or not a highlight, but to watch that cutscene over again, it is so emotional. And that weight is because of your connection and of the story going back to the first game. The other story that I think handles it in a way that the ending should have is the whole Quarian and Geth War, which, again, most of the decisions you make that impact how this plays out goes back to Mass Effect 2 and everything you did there. It is really difficult, this storyline, to get the Geth and the Quarian to make peace, and that makes sense. They hate each other. They've been at war. The Geth completely ran the Quarian out of their home. Quarian hate them for that, obviously. The Geth hate the Quarian for making them their robot slaves. So there's a lot of tension there, to say the least, that has been going on for a long time. So making one or two wrong decisions can completely ruin that. And the multiple outcomes that happen here, again, is so fascinating from a writing perspective, from a storytelling perspective. Things you did in Mass Effect 2 involving Tali and involving Legion will completely determine whether or not an entire race dies, or the majority of a race dies in this war. And for most people, unless you are following a guide, that is probably what will happen in your first playthrough of this game. You will end up with the Geth or the Quarian. And that will lead, if they both have survived up to this point, can lead to Legion dying, or it can lead to Tali in another emotional scene committing suicide. That, again, that emotional impact from these two stories, the reason I want to talk to them is because it's what I want to talk about them because the final ending is missing this. The final ending, apart from being kind of confusing with the whole catalyst and the child situation, whatever's going on there, all it really does is give you 3 choices. Renegade, Paragon, or an in-between, a green in-between that they threw in for this. And I don't even necessarily think the results of those choices were bad. I just think the whole build-up and the way they tied everything else up, leading up to that, just ending up becoming one decision as opposed to a build of decisions, is what gives this game its bad reputation. I'm not going to defend that. That part of the game, yes, it doesn't have the impact you want it to, especially for the big epic ending of a trilogy. But just about everything else in this game completely nails it. It nails that emotional impact. It nails your decisions mattering. And it is very unfortunately overshadowed by the ending in a way that has given this game a reputation that is negative. I'm pretty sure most people talking about Mass Effect 3, unless you are a big fan of the franchise, or even I'm sure a lot of the big fans talk down about Mass Effect 3. And Mass Effect 2 gets all of the hype around it, the reputation. And I'm not going to say it's undeserved because Mass Effect 2 is incredible, but I feel that 3 closes out most of these storylines in a very emotionally impactful way, in a way that really immerses you and the decisions you have made in a very satisfying conclusion, other than the main ending. That is going to be it for me. I can't go much deeper. Well, I could, but I can't without going even further into the storyline of Mass Effect. The main point I wanted to make, and I hope I made with this, is that this game has a bad reputation because of that final ending, and I wanted to outline how this game is actually a big improvement, gameplay-wise, over Mass Effect 1 and 2, and for the most part, it concludes in very satisfying ways in major storylines, going back to Mass Effect 1. And I hope over time, as more time passes, and maybe as more people play it with the Legendary Edition, and as this new Mass Effect is coming out, people can start to look back at Mass Effect 3 more fondly than they do, instead of just thinking, oh, that ending sucked. Because it's so much more than that. Thank you again to Matt for having me on. If you want to hear more about my opinions on games, check out the Offshore Gamescast, the soon-to-be-released dual-wielding podcast. And, of course, to close us out, as always, happy gaming.
We've made difficult decisions.
And there are still more ahead of us.
2 people aren't enough to save the galaxy.
We need the toughest,
Smartest.
deadliest allies.
We need you.
We need you to join us.
And listen to Reignite.
A certain point of view podcast about storytelling.
Love.
And Mass Effect.
Join us every other Thursday as we fight for the fate of an entire galaxy.
You can find us everywhere you get your podcasts.
Or at certainpov.com/reignite.
We're counting on you.
We should go.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.